Today's episode of M&A Science is brought to you by S&P Global Market Intelligence. If you're in corp dev or private equity, you know the pain. Good private company data is hard to come by. Everyone's still chasing clean, reliable, up-to-date data. I started out using CapIQ Pro for public comps, but didn't realize until recently how deep their private company coverage has gotten. Over 58 million private companies, global reach, and actually usable for real deal work. This isn't surface level. You get real metrics, ownership, financials, funding rounds, even asset level insights. So if you're still toggling between a dozen tools, trying to piece together the picture, maybe it's time to stop guessing and start sourcing better. Explore this data at spglobal.com/PCD-science. Again, that's spglobal.com/PCD-science. Or look for a link in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to the M&A Science Podcast. This podcast is part of a mission to rethink how M&A is done. The old school seller-led approach, it's dead. Buyer-led M&A is all about strategy, alignment, and efficiency, putting value creation at the center of every deal. And let's be real, it's not just about closing the deal. It's about making it successful. We uncover what truly works in M&A by learning directly from the best. I'm your host, Kisan Patel, founder and CEO of Deal Room and chief scientist at M&A Science. Joining me today, Johanna Jaakola, integration lead on Cisco's corporate development integration team. Johanna partners with the deal lead from the earliest phases to shape integration strategy, coordinate diligence across a large functional community, and drive execution to full integration. Tesia Hostetler, leader of Cisco's acquisition integration practice. Tesia owns Cisco's end-to-end methodology, playbooks, and tooling, including compliance and full integration criteria, and helped design the approach for Cisco's recent transformational acquisitions. This episode is part 2 of our conversation from last episode. If you missed part 1, I recommend giving that a listen first. Otherwise, let's pick it up right where we left off. When you go through diligence, how does that actually shape your integration planning, right? You have this thesis, you start going through diligence, and I don't think there's ever a deal in history that has 0 findings. So but findings bubble up, and then obviously you go through, you talk through it, think of a mitigation plan for those findings. But then in turn, you're leading integration. Now all of a sudden, how does that sort of impact the actual integration work stream?
It does impact it a lot. So part of this tentative integration strategy that we set out very early on, we're testing that in diligence, certainly to be able to detail it out as we do find diligence findings. And attached to the integration strategy, in order to measure, is this acquisition going to be successful, we call out something called value drivers, essentially the metrics on which we do acquisition performance management. So it's important in that process to test out, will this target be able to achieve success given the value drivers that we've formed based on the deal thesis? So everything is surrounded around deal thesis and the value drivers, the metrics that we're measuring and going back to throughout the deal life cycle to ensure that we're achieving those targets, because that's when we say this is success.
So you're those metrics, you're really looking for like certainty against achieving those value drivers.
They are quantifiable, or they're at least time bound. So there's certain quantitative metrics that we achieve based on which dimension of the deal it is. For example, it could be retention from a people perspective. It could be go-to-market synergies for the larger deals where that's applicable. Or it could be technology. We're acquiring a company to achieve faster time to market. So it's roadmap bound, it's time bound in terms of that value driver. So it depends on the acquisition, but usually has those 3 aspects or dimensions.
Do you have an example of like when you come across something and you're like, all right, we had to change our plan here or modify it?
Well, it could be when, for example, a tech in talent, like a tech tuck-in. Technology isn't what we expected it to be, or there's IP issues, for example, then you have to reevaluate. And that's really the purpose of diligence, right? Like we thought we were going to do X with this acquisition, but you can't because of those findings in diligence. So that would be, something that will form a no-go recommendation.
It could be a no-go, or you might adjust your integration plan, or you might adjust your sort of deal thesis of, what do we expect the outcomes to be, because some of these things that we found out aren't exactly the way we thought it would be.
Yeah. I would say we typically do smaller tweaks on the deal thesis, but in large, the deal thesis is typically pretty set at those early stages. Yeah. And just because we find something in diligence, I would say it's harder to adjust the deal thesis based on diligence findings. What we would do is adjust the integration strategy based on diligence findings.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
or price or deal conditions.
Yes.
Right. For sure.
you got like a lot of little things circulating back, right? Because you're validating this deal thesis, the integration thesis is part of it. And then you're with this integration-led approach, you're really refining those metrics of what's going to drive success, and you're building certainty around those metrics. And then the other thing is decisions. So it sounds like you get a little leg up on some of these key decisions you're going to have to make, which I have concluded is such a critical factor in how well you can integrate a company, is really setting the stage to make fast-paced decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, then just integration gets delayed and it becomes excruciatingly painful. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, is that kind of what you're actually doing? I don't want to make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth, but like you're sort of going through diligence and you're actually taking some of this information, but you're using that opportunity to start making decisions for how you're going to integrate.
Yeah. So you want to have the critical decisions made early on, as you said, because ultimately what we want to do is as fast as possible, time is of the greatest value here. As soon as the deal closes, you want to get started in terms of execution of the integration strategy and plan. Because for larger companies where we have assumed go-to-market synergies, for example, you want to get the go-to-market vehicle started so you don't miss out, because time is literally money here. If you get behind on those synergies, we know how hard it is to catch up, and you have a momentum in the beginning. So making those decisions early on so that you can have strategies aligned, so that you can have operational processes aligned to that strategy. And of course, when it comes to go-to-market, having seller incentives lined up as well. So there's many aspects.
Yeah, and I think really coming out of diligence and in all of the final kind of commit or the buy decision, as part of that is this kind of agreed upon integration strategy, but things that are embedded in there are things around an end of sale, end of life decision, for example.
Yep.
Right? So if that's a critical part in unlocking some of that value, because we need to exit customer obligations so we can refocus an engineering team, for example, right? Or, even down to site strategy. So we've kind of, said, hey, you guys are in metros that Cisco already has a presence. You're going to co-locate so the teams can work together. And getting ahead of a decision that, if you come open-ended with the target and they have maybe an emotional connection to that building, right? You've almost pre-made the decision and aligned the Cisco executives. So then when you go in, you're not going in, open. You're going in like, hey, you're going to be consolidating into the office in these 3 metros where you guys are located. It gets to that level. We have our operations team kind of look at, some of their critical systems and make a recommendation of like, hey, we're going to, get to a unified, CRM system, for example. And that's all in there and all written down as part of that commit materials. So we have that to kind of reference back to. So yeah, as much of that as we can do early on, the better.
With that, I can see how you can accelerate things ultimately. Is it the goal to objectively integrate as fast as possible?
Without destroying value.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was
Great answer. Thank you.
I was going to say, because I can imagine there's like pieces where you kind of mentioned, you like integrate, not integrate, reverse integrate. But then there's also a piece of like, all right, might want to slow down that part. Like we might want to wait a little bit and not, just because there's some things that are different.
And that's why I think it's so important to be very surgical.
Surgical is probably the right word.
Surgical is really the best practice, I think. If some parts of the business are not mature, like the go-to-market vehicles, there's something Cisco has to change before you start integration, it's better to wait because you can't, first of all, optimize or perform the integration as you expected. So some things, there's a sequence of happenings and you have to respect that. And sometimes that's the right thing to do.
Yep.
Yeah, you just have to be really clear on what's generating value and understand how that works so you can then make decisions. Again, that's why you learn about that stuff as early as possible and make decisions around, okay, we need to protect X, Y, or Z because it's critical to how we're generating value as a combined company. Yeah.
Do you have like general rules of like, hey, we want to integrate these functions in early versus other functions in later?
Yeah, we certainly have rules, guidelines,
yes.
expectations, right? So things that move very, very quickly are anything on the employee side, right? Like we need one HR system as soon as possible, one payroll, one set of benefits, all of that stuff, right? Like we don't, like none of that lingers. Sites, we're trying to be also move that as quickly as possible, rip the Band-Aid off. And honestly, anything, kind of corporate facing, right? Because you want to make sure that, your finance team has oversight on their finance team and that those teams come together very quickly. So we're making sure we're doing everything for all of that, finance close, consolidation, external reporting done really well right away. Legal, same story. All, any of the regulatory compliance, tax, like all of those we integrate very quickly because of the legal and regulatory issues in those spaces. Where we get more measured is things around, engineering, sales, stuff like that, where we're really trying to be like, okay, what model works best for what we're trying to do, both for the business unit that acquisition is going into and how the acquisition is structured, right, and drives value.
What's day one like? And then the thing, is a big party, and I'm really, this is the win-win, right? And buyer-led M&A of how do you get the best people experience for the incoming employees and the best people experience for the existing employees. So they're really excited and just like motivated. Cause you hear the horror stories where you don't communicate things right and you got FUD happening and people are just like, right. You mentioned the attrition metric.
Yep.
And all of a sudden that's in the red line.
And that is acknowledged as a critical process. So shout out to our employee experience team, whose critical responsibility it is essentially to ensure that, and they have a really smooth process for after close. There is standard methodology for, clear communications and, how do we perform onboarding of acquired employees to Cisco, so that they know the basics of how Cisco works as a company, what does the standard set of tools look like, and of course get a face. So we try to do as many of these onboarding for new employees in person. So I had the fortune of traveling to the UK for the Splunk acquisition to do that welcoming in person for the UK employees. And it really is a good way of showing the human side
you have
of
a party?
Transactions. We did have a
You
party.
have a party?
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good way to start things.
Yeah.
Like, hey, let's celebrate. How about swag? You hook people up for swag.
That too.
Yeah.
These are the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
To make day one successful, you got to have a party, you got to have swag. Anything else are like big day one staples?
I would say I'll call out announce versus, day one. Announce, we try and have one of the Cisco business leaders be there hand in hand with an acquired leader so they can articulate that joint vision, right? So that is, as soon as the employees are knowing, we typically do a private announce first. So they hear it from their leadership and the new Cisco leadership to really hopefully, get them bought in to you were operating towards goal X, right? As an independent company, now we're operating together to goal Y, but really getting them to understand that as early as possible and see the Cisco leader, right? And see their leader together, I think is really important. And that's at announce. And then all the good stuff Johanna talked about is that's in that next phase of the employee journey of okay, what does it mean to be a Cisco employee, and how do we help you give that white glove service as you kind of move over?
Oh, so this goes back to the big picture, overall strategy. So at announce, you want to get alignment on strategy, folks excited about this actually makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And then day one, party and swag.
Yeah, there's different day ones,
exactly.
right? So day one is when we announce. It's before the acquisition has even closed. Yeah. So
you'll actually consider that day one announce.
Well, announce is when everybody finds out, right?
Everybody finds out.
So that's day one of
and you want
awareness.
that to go well,
Yeah,
right?
so hopefully you're in control of that and it's not just leaked out, but
Yeah.
So that is really one of those, we call those moments that matter.
Okay.
It's announced.
Moments that matter.
It's the first time the employees of the target are hearing about the acquisition. So having our chief product officer there is typically important. The highest level of executive leadership team at Cisco is acknowledging this. It's a huge, I think, acknowledgement of the importance of them as employees, and then also showing their leader, their CEO, there together. So back again to the why. That's critical for that first meeting and hearing about the acquisition for the employees. So that's the leading cause of the private announce, and what we try to convey as clear as possible.
Yeah. Any things that happen after day one? I feel like there's a lot of people, you got a clear plan in place. You got people sort of fired up at this point, hopefully. And then is there anything that just Cisco does to sort of give assurance that things are ultimately going to be successful through the execution?
So we do a couple of things. So we look to each function that's receiving employees to after you, okay, you've become a Cisco employee, but okay, what does it mean to be an engineer at Cisco, right? And how do we help you understand? So there's typically, that receiving function, we're okay, how are you going to engage those employees? How are you going to help them function in a broader context? So things that have happened is, we've done teams or at least executives visit each other, right? If they're in different sites, right? So we have people set up with buddies. We have, those acquired teams getting pulled into their broader all hands, right? Just making sure that they're connected with the rest of the employees in that function and those kind of cultural rituals and the things that they do. And then the other lens that we've taken is we recognize that it's sometimes hard to be a manager at Cisco because the way that, because there's all the performance rituals and the compensation rituals, all of that is surely different at Cisco than it was at some tiny startup, right? So we do a acquired leader enablement that is very specific to, hey, this is what it means to be a leader / manager at Cisco. And so if we enable those leaders, then they can help disseminate that to their teams so they don't feel like kind of lost in the broader Cisco. We're trying to equip them with tools. So there's a couple of things that really, a lot of our people teams have developed that, these are our M&A teams that sit in our people, our HR function that have really developed, some really fantastic programs like what I just outlined to help make that an employee journey and not just a like plunk, here you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to add to that, it's perfectly described in terms of the execution. Just zooming out, back to timing on when we do things. This engagement plan on how acquired leaders will need to engage with Cisco leaders, and the acquiring business units leadership needs to be engaged with the acquired employees to show how important it is, and all of that goes into an engagement plan at an early stage, which again we're validating in due diligence. If there's a certain people risk, for example, there's a heightened risk for attrition after close, then that will need to be detailed how it's going to be mitigated as part of that engagement plan or change plan. And so it depends on what risks we see, what level of effort we need to do in terms of the engagement plan and the engagement activities. But then there's also a standardized set of those functional onboarding activities that we do every single
I got
deal.
it. So there's sort of this broader engagement plan, and then you have initiatives to connect to people. So they're really like fitting in at home. And then there's leadership enablement, which I think would be like a whole podcast topic of its own, because it's one that I've noticed the companies that are really successful integration have a strong leadership enablement program in place, and the ones that aren't don't. So
Yeah.
why to pick that one up. So one thing we have not talked about through this whole interview is those corporate development folks out there. You took away diligence from them, so that's pretty much it. They just get the handshake on the LOI and then they're out.
Well, we do partner with them on a quarterly basis, like Tesia outlined, and
I would like that job. I'll get to LOI and I'm out. That would be beautiful.
Actually, I think in this, Johanna and I were talking about this as we were doing the prep, is they really manage, beyond just doing deals, they manage an overall portfolio of investments.
Yep.
Right? In a full life cycle of like, hey, what spaces is Cisco interested in? Right? Where do we need to be engaged to see how the technology is emerging? Okay, how do we get investments in those companies? How do we follow that as it grows? How do we potentially take an ownership position, right? If because we'll typically have like some sort of right of refusal, right? If a company that we're invested in is looking like it's going to get bought, right? So they're managing all of that, right? And so, yeah, deal making's a part of it, but it's just kind of like the end stage of a broader kind of strategic portfolio management. They're our friends.
Keep them focused on
work. Yeah, exactly.
Well, shout out to our corp dev team, because if we wouldn't get involved at an early stage, it wouldn't be setting integration up for success. So
That's
I'm
true.
forever grateful for Karen Ashley, our VP, for building that relationship on a leadership level and enabling us to do what we do at such an early stage.
I think we got to rebrand. Like it's almost in your organization, it should be not corp dev, and it should be rainmakers and value creators. And just
I love that.
Yeah, that's nice branding.
Sounds more fun.
there you go.
This episode is sponsored by Deal Room. And if you're on the buy side, you know the pain. Most M&A tools, especially those clunky data rooms, aren't built for you. They're made for sellers, and it shows. Deal Room is the #1 platform built specifically for buyer-led M&A. It's designed to help you lead the deal from pipeline to diligence to integration with the structure and visibility you actually need. You get features like built-in project management, templated deal rooms, real-time collaboration, and AI contract review, all built to support how buy-side teams really work. No jumping between tools, no messy workarounds, and no hidden fees. Check it out at dealroom.net or click the link in the description to see how it makes buy-side M&A a whole lot easier. Lead the deal, own the outcome. Here's to the deal.
And Tesia, you mentioned earlier, you used the phrase M&A community. Mm-hmm. What does that actually mean at Cisco?
Yeah, so for us, we really recognize that all of the functions that have standing integration professionals, right? So typically we've got a handful of folks in our major functions because we are a serial acquirer, and those folks really serve as the bridge of someone who knows integration well and knows their function really well, right? So they really go in and take this integration and the integration strategy, and then using that functional knowledge, say, what does that really mean, right, for IT, right, or for supply chain, or for finance, right? What's the highest order work? What are the things that are going to be the most problematic? And then they're pulling in their broader stakeholder teams, right? Like maybe it's the accounting team that needs to understand how to do a deal review and approval for these new types of deals that are coming in because we acquired a company, right? They're the ones that have to build that bridge and make that linkage. And so, we recognize, and they help us in kind of the central integration team really connect and understand how this integration is going to flow as you really go to this process that has to change, this system upgrade, this team that needs to go do something differently. They're what make that happen. And so we are very tied into that broader community. So we have those leaders. We meet with them, every 2 weeks as a integration leadership community. So within our central integration team, plus all of those function integration leaders, to talk about what's happening on pipeline, what's happening on Splunk, what's some top of mind issues that we need to be more on top of, right? So really that the leadership level's connected, but then those teams are connected because that, Johanna as an integration lead is literally pulling together all of those functional team members to understand and drive that work down to, this finance process, this IT process, right? And we have quarterly all hands where we all get together as a broader community, right? So we really recognize that we're all one team. And if we're not all working together and pulling in the same direction, like this work doesn't happen.
That's wonderful described. And we all stay connected, not only through these meetings. We have a wonderful tool where we measure all the inputs, lessons learned, all value drivers, everything related to all of the deals that we do is all in one homegrown tool called M&A Hub.
Central source of truth.
The
which I think
central
is
source of truth.
really important. Like in an M&A program, you need one place. You can collaborate, priorities, central truth.
Yes.
And,
Yep. That's how everyone, really understands what's happening. Yeah. We have the full detailed plan, all of the aspects of full integration or compliance alignment that need to happen is all tracked there. So teams can understand what other teams are doing that they're dependent on, right, for work. And also centrally, like, Johanna, like an IL, can go in and understand what's happening across the full scope of the deal. We have all of our metrics in there so people can see how the deal's performing from a financial perspective, from a retention perspective, all of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
That's
so I
awesome.
lead all of that work with the M&A community for every deal. And we course correct when needed, of course. When we see those inputs are tracking one certain direction, we're off on timing or we're off on sales, could be other things, anything. If it's off track, we go and talk to the M&A community in the area which it belongs to also, of course, celebrate with the M&A community when things go well. So it is our M&A family.
Okay, so now this got pretty complicated pretty quick when we kind of explained what the M&A community is, because in a small scale, you usually have your deal team, maybe your lucky integration leader, it's incorporated, which it should be. And then you have like fractional folks in the functions, and that's it, right? In this case, you have dedicated folks pretty much in all your functions.
Well, both model depending on a function. So we have fractional in each function, or we can have dedicated resources.
Well, yeah, typically we at least have one or two, and sometimes more.
That's what I mentioned. It's in your model. It's like a mix. You'll have like dedicated plus fractional that they're sort of liaison into. Liaising into.
Liaising.
Liaising. Yeah. Liaising into. And so it's like, that's where it got so complicated quickly, because then it's like, whoa, you got some leads and then they got support. And so how many people are we talking about altogether here?
15 functions, Cisco terms of functions.
How big's the M&A community?
Oh, man. 180?
Wow.
150, 180?
That's a tiny little country there.
Yeah. Well, it's still, compared to whatever, 90,000 employees at Cisco, it is a tiny little country. But it's emphasis on the tiny versus emphasis on the country. But yeah.
I go to all these M&A conferences, like that would be a whole conference. So
right.
So, and then coordinating it, you have these sort of reoccurring meetings, keep everybody updated. And then tech, we talk about, it's a big thing, which I totally agree on. I've got to learn a little bit about your tech stack too, which was just, you've just worked at it for so many years, and it's like a very bespoke to how you do things. And so it's like really fascinating to get ideas and learn from it. Is that, is there any other things that are sort of like special for just aligning this M&A community? It sounds like, this sort of like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like a qualitative kind of in-person conversation, and then having them hub sort of like, look, no matter whatever you're doing, it's all tracked in one place. Yeah,
we do, some trainings. We do some cohorts. So we recognize like when, we get a certain kind of critical mass of new folks across the broader community, we'll run, a few hours of training just to say like, okay, do we all understand how this broader process works and why we do what we do? Recognizing that they're going to bring their functional expertise, but like, they need to understand like what happens on an acquisition. Because typically, and this is true even within central acquisition and integration, folks come in with Cisco experience, but not acquisition experience.
Yep.
So they need to learn acquisitions as they come into the role. So that's why, my team will run, these kind of, we have some like, training on demand. You can go check it out. But then we try and run an in-person session, every like few quarters when you get a critical mass of folks that are kind of new to the community, to make sure that they understand why we do what we do, what's the value to Cisco, what can you expect from your central team, what do other teams, because we actually bring in other functions leadership so they understand who's doing what work, right?
Yes.
Like, so the people acquisition leader will come in, the sales acquisition leader will come in. We also bring in corp dev, and they talk about deal strategy and how they come up with deal strategy. So everyone kind of gets this baseline understanding, so they can then start putting the pieces together as to like, okay, my scope is this, very specific thing, but how is it connecting into the broader picture?
Yeah, setting up continuing education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a future Cisco M&A team member that's listening to this right now. And nothing, I'm just... Okay, that's really helpful to get a whole sense of what the M&A community is. Now, I got to ask you something a little funny. I don't know if this is off record. This will stay on record, but let's pretend it's off record. So when you see a large public deal announced, right, going back to the Splunk thing, I'm under the impression from enough of these interviews that there's secrecy, right? Because you don't want a big deal like that to get leaked because it just creates havoc and like stock price fluctuates and it's bad.
It will ruin it. It will kill it.
It will kill the deal. Kill the deal. We've seen that.
Yep.
We've seen that happen before. And, so you hear the stories like the executives like flying in the middle of nowhere to like talk about a deal or some really obscure things. And with that, I'm assuming that there's just very limited diligence that actually happens. Because at the end of the day, you see these deals transact on some premium over a traded stock price. Because the company's public, there's so much information that's really publicly available. And it's almost like that kind of transaction. It's like, look, you can do all your diligence you want with public information. At the end of the day, our board's got to approve it. And there's just shareholders that just are fixated on what that dollar amount's going to be. And that's it. Nobody's caring about any of this integration stuff. And it happens. Like some of these deals get rushed and we hear crazy blow up stories of that going wrong. And I'm just curious of like, how did that really go down at Splunk?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I was going to emphasize that because it's a public deal, there is so much information available, which makes our lives easier when it comes to due diligence. But I also wanted to, just for the case of Splunk, we have many questions in due diligence and we got all of them answered. So it's still a collaboration with the targets in terms of due diligence. So it's not like we're relying on public information only, but it makes our lives easier when it's a public target, right? But when it comes to the number of people, then that's the critical matter. So it's not getting leaked. So because of how many people we typically involve in due diligence with our functional structure, we decided to limit the number of people that were under the tent for Splunk and actually took in outside support to do due diligence. So that's something we outsourced. We typically do that in-house, but for the Splunk deal, we decided to do a third party.
I was involved very early on, and Cisco knew we wanted to do a transformational deal before we decided on Splunk specifically. So there was a lot of work on what did we think that kind of deal would need to bring to Cisco. There were a select number of targets evaluated against our strategy. Splunk came as what was a very attractive target. And then there was quite a bit of very senior executive level conversations with the corp dev team, the corp strategy, and just a super small handful of integration people to really start developing what this would mean. And we did bring in an external party to even do some customer surveying of to kind of get that validation of what was Splunk good at? What was Cisco good at? What kind of combinations might be interesting? So we did it's not diligence around Splunk per se, but diligence around the combination and where Splunk was strong and where Cisco was strong. And so that helped inform some of the synergy work that we did. So it wasn't...
That was pre-LOI or was that after
Well,
LOI?
I mean, LOI for a public company, that started pre-LOI, but I think we invested a little bit more into it after LOI.
Okay.
Yeah. And so even though true due diligence, like what we do most of the time, because we mainly buy non-public companies, didn't look the same, but we did try and do different kinds of work to validate, the deal thesis and the synergy cases.
So you didn't deviate. You stayed true to your model of how you create value. But there is some acknowledgement around the sensitivity, keeping the tent pretty narrow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you still did the work. You still actually went through doing the reps and it wasn't just, we're going to scribble a number down and see if we get thumbs up on it.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
pretty robust.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Do you know the thing that there's culture that we talk about, like integration. That's such a big factor. I feel like the other huge one is go to market. And that's one where it happens. You buy the company, you financially model it, you assume you're going to create all these revenue synergies, and nobody like thinks through an actual go to market plan, or you're trying to figure it out after you close. How do you do it? What's the Cisco way of thinking about go to market?
Yeah, so it goes back to deal thesis, right? Like think about the customers. What would make sense? What would be a good customer story? Like in the world where the two companies are joined, what would be the customer story? What's aligned to strategy? And what is going to help us achieve that compelling customer story? So it's around what is the product story then around those customer use cases? And what do we need to enable that? So the next step is, once we have the strategy, the deal thesis from a go-to-market perspective outlined, it is about making the community excited, right? So with those proof points, stories, and there's the operationalization around that strategy as well. Like you have to get those pieces together. You have to be able to sell the products, right? So the transactability, seller incentives need to be in place. So that comes more down to the execution part of it, but you have to, again, start with a strategy, aligning customer story, and make that happen.
That's a whole big work stream of its own.
Yes.
Now, so you have this deal thesis that you do even pre-LOI. Is go-to-market in that deal thesis, or do you look at it as a whole separate?
No, it's in the deal thesis, and it's in the integration strategy. I mentioned commercial transition. It's one of the primary sections of the integration strategy. Like, how are we actually going to sell with joint forces with the product? Is the product going to be sold? Those are all decisions that are made as we form that integration strategy.
And then that will continue, like we talked about earlier, that would shape as you go through diligence, because then you can flesh out the integration planning, those key points, the customer story, the product story, how do you operationalize go-to-market, but then all the fun underpinning things that makes it easier said than done.
CRMs and other fun things.
Yeah. Sales comp.
Quote to cash. And
Goaling. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
There are plenty of aspects.
How do you test portfolio fit and seller incentives before close?
You had an example, Tesia, around Splunk.
Yeah, I think that's what some of this external work on Splunk did, is really just to say, like, how does the Splunk and Cisco portfolio come together, but more focused on, like, who's going to sell what and how, right? So for us, one of the things that we do have to think about from a go-to-market strategy for Cisco specifically is we are 90% plus sold through partners. And that partner ecosystem is very important in how Cisco goes to market. And that is typically not how other companies or even Splunk goes to market. They had a partner motion, but they have a direct motion. But when we think about, okay, when you're coming into Cisco and we're going to try and sell through Cisco's sellers, through Cisco's routes to market, we really have to think about what's the partner play there, because that has negatively impacted some go-to-market synergies in the past for us. If we don't think about, hey, we're going to take something that was potentially sold direct and we're now going to sell it through a partner when it goes through Cisco. And how does the partner make money? How does the Cisco seller make money? Like, all of that can be very complex and has made some things that seemed easy on paper really hard. And this is pre-Splunk for sure. I mean, a lot of our previous product deals, to get market traction when you shift from how the acquired was selling it to how Cisco will sell it, has been challenging. We learned some of those lessons for Splunk, and those are some of the places where we're not disrupting how Splunk is selling until we can get a motion that works that we're sure is not going to destroy value. So those are some of those things that we really have to think through.
Surgical.
There you go.
That's why go-to-market is complicated.
Yeah.
What's the secret to make it work well?
To be surgical about it. Assess where it fits.
Because again, I feel like there's this big assumption problem where you're just like, hey, we're going to cross-sell. Like I'm doing it right now. I'm looking at a deal and I'm like, this is an FP&A software company. They sell in a similar customer base as ours. Mm-hmm. We could totally cross-sell this product. And I'm eager to do a deal. I'm like itching since I keep doing all these interviews. I'm like, when do I get to do an M&A deal? Mm-hmm. And so I'm like the deal guy that's just like eager to do a deal. And then hold on, we pump should we like partner with them first and like validate we can actually cross-sell? Yeah,
it's actually more complicated in real life than it is on paper because you have to get the account teams thrown together. You have to find those compelling customer stories, the use cases, and then go sell with the one story to the customer of the joint offers, the bundles, or the integrated product. So it depends on what you're trying to sell, right?
Yeah. And partnership at least helps you test.
I was going to say you're sort of
that model.
Deals that go smoother, ones that probably already are partners where you already have that emotion.
Yes.
Yeah,
versus just you assume it and then you just try it and then it's like, whoa, that's where you got that higher risk factor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and nothing we're saying here implies Cisco is 100% successful at that. Like I'm just
full disclaimer. Yeah.
Full disclaimer. But yeah, I think we've done really well when we've bought someone that was like an already a partner or like an OEM, right? And we're like, oh, this already, like the value prop to the customer and the interest in the market's already been validated. And so then you make it one thing, one company rather than two companies partnering. Yeah. And the other thing is we'll shift strategies.
What are principles that have like helped you move fast on Splunk and just generally be successful at M&A at Cisco?
I think we touched a little bit on it already, like being very focused on outcomes, decision-driven, and doing it early on. Like be obsessed about the outcomes and be obsessed about what decisions you have to make and what time to realize the value.
That's
100%. Yep.
And just get in early, plan integration, get an early thesis before LOI, and then during diligence, validate it, get a head start on those tough decisions you got to make M&A successful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I got to ask before we wrap up, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
I want to tee it up with saying sometimes the craziest things happen on the small things on a deal. Like you would think like the big decisions like strategy or price, would be some things that will stir up things, but it's in the people perspective. And sometimes the small things become the big things that can actually jeopardize the closing of the deal. So I don't know if you have a story.
I don't know about
that.
jeopardizing closing, but man, we had VP level escalation and at least a couple of weeks of discussion about how a certain espresso machine at the Cisco site was unacceptable compared to the espresso machine that they had had previously. And there you go. It's the little things that apparently people get very emotionally attached to. And so, yes, we had an escalation and had to get a site exception to get a different espresso machine installed.
Were they Italian? Because that should have been part of the cultural,
right.
the cultural
assessment. I know. We should have known.
Right?
No.
This has been such a great conversation. I'd like to thank you both, Tesia, Johanna, for taking the time from working on deals to have this conversation and helping me be a better M&A scientist.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was
really appreciate it.
If you're listening to this podcast at this point, I commend you, my fellow M&A scientist. It's a lot of content to digest in long form. A lot of people don't have the attention span for it. So I love to hear from you. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Love connecting. I love getting feedback on this because I need somebody. I just put this out there and I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not. So want to get the feedback, want to hear about topic ideas or things of interesting questions I can ask, criticism, whatever. I'll take it. With that, till next time, here's to the deal.